Star Trek. The original series is a monument in television history, a vision of the future built on faith in humanity. But what if I told you that behind its bold optimism lay stories of fear, frustration, and quiet rebellion? The cast who carried the dream to the stars were fighting their own unseen battles on Earth. You know, the bridge, the uniforms, the famous split infinitive, to boldly go. But have you ever wondered what the actors were really enduring between those takes? What rivalries, loyalty, and heartbreak shaped their performances? And how many of them carried secret pain even as they preached unity across the galaxy? Let's pull back the curtain on a show that changed everything and see the detail that most fans never figured out. The story behind Star Trek's cast isn't just about science fiction, it is about survival. At the heart of Star Trek lies a paradox, a show that preached equality yet existed in a system that often resisted it. The big idea behind this story is simple. The same courage that fueled the Enterprise on screen was mirrored by its actors off-screen. They fought studio prejudice, financial pressure, and even each other. This video will uncover 4 pillars of that truth. The first, the immense weight carried by William Shatner, who became both hero and lightning rod. The second, the silenced struggles of Nichelle Nichols and George Takei, who broke barriers but paid emotional prices. The third, the creative wars that nearly destroyed Gene Roddenberry's vision before it could take flight. And the fourth, the irony of a show canceled for low ratings, only to become immortal. Beneath the polished optimism was exhaustion and quiet defiance. This was not just television, it was a revolution dressed as entertainment. It was the year 1966. Television was ruled by westerns and sitcoms when NBC rolled the dice on a cerebral space drama created by a former bomber pilot. Gene Roddenberry wanted to give viewers something deeper. A morality play in space using the final frontier as a mirror for Earth. Roddenberry's pitch was bold and dangerous. He envisioned a multi-ethnic crew representing humanity united after centuries of war. The network almost rejected it twice, calling it too intellectual, too risky. The pilot, The Cage, was rejected, but a second one, Where No Man Has Gone Before, convinced NBC to give it a chance. Star Trek premiered with modest fanfare and low expectations. Few realized they were watching the beginning of an idea that would outlive them all. But even in those first months, the cracks were visible. The crew may have been united on screen, but backstage tensions were already forming under the weight of studio control and ego. William Shatner became the face of Star Trek, Captain James T. Kirk. The fearless leader, the model of decisive command. Yet behind the swagger, Shatner was fighting for validation. He was a Canadian actor trying to protect his position in an industry that saw him as replaceable. Leonard Nimoy, as Mr. Spock, represented calm logic, but off-screen he carried the emotional burden of typecasting. He once said in 1967 that he feared never being seen as human again. Nichelle Nichols, meanwhile, embodied progress as Lieutenant Uhura, one of the first black women on primetime television in a role of authority. But offset, she was marginalized, underpaid, and at times written out of scenes. When she considered quitting, it was Martin Luther King Jr. who convinced her to stay, calling her role vital for civil rights. That is the paradox. Star Trek looked like a dream of equality. Yet those who gave it life were still fighting the same old struggles, and the pressure of maintaining that illusion would only grow heavier. Early in production, NBC made a fateful call. The studio demanded that Captain Pike be replaced with a younger, more energetic lead. Enter Shatner, and with him came a different rhythm, one that would reshape the show's destiny. The chemistry between Shatner and Nimoy became the core of Star Trek's soul. Kirk and Spock, logic and instinct. The network loved the dynamic, but it came with a cost. The supporting cast became background noise. George Takei, James Doohan, and DeForest Kelley fought for lines, even as Shatner's screen time expanded. Internal memos from 1967 show actors quietly protesting script imbalance. Roddenberry sided with his star, believing a single focal point was necessary to survive the network's demands. It worked, ratings improved slightly, but resentment simmered under the surface. Friendships were strained, alliances formed and dissolved, and then everything changed when Nimoy's quiet power began to eclipse Shatner's spotlight. The bridge of the Enterprise looked serene on camera, but behind the lights, it was chaos. The set overheated under heavy lamps. Actors fainted in costume. Makeup melted under the glare. Temperatures often reached over 100 degrees, Budget cuts forced the crew to reuse props from other shows. Phasers were spray-painted toys, alien costumes were stitched from curtains. Episodes were filmed on brutal schedules that left no room for rest. Shatner pushed himself to exhaustion, performing his own stunts when doubles were unavailable. Nimoy developed hearing problems from stage explosions. Nichelle Nichols endured constant rewrites that erased her scenes. There were no star trailers, only plywood partitions and cold sandwiches, but somehow that struggle created authenticity. The tension on set bled into performances, giving the series its pulse of barely contained chaos. Now here's where it gets complicated. The more successful Star Trek became, the more invisible its pain seemed to outsiders. Most viewers remember the iconic visuals, the transporter shimmer, the Vulcans salute, the warp effect. But there are hidden details that tell a deeper story. Watch Kirk's command scenes closely. Shatner's subtle shoulder tilt toward Nimoy is not just staging. It was a deliberate signal of alliance, and acknowledgement of the trust between their characters. Notice how Uhura's station was always positioned just behind Kirk. That was not random. It symbolized communication as the link between command and understanding. Roddenberry fought to keep her console visible despite NBC objections. And in the episode Amok Time, the moment Spock smiles for the first and only time in the original run was not scripted. Nimoy improvised it, a fragile glimpse of humanity breaking through logic. These are not accidents. They are confessions hidden in plain sight, messages from actors trying to preserve meaning inside a machine that often ignored them. Star Trek's biggest battles weren't fought against Klingons, they were fought against NBC. The network viewed the show as a ratings liability. Too complex for mass audiences, too expensive for its slot. Roddenberry resisted every demand to make it simpler. The executives wanted more fistfights, fewer ethics. He wanted stories about prejudice and power. When he refused to compromise, the studio began cutting his budget in secret. Writers were told to reuse footage. Fans wrote letters begging the network to renew. Over 100,000 letters poured into NBC headquarters in 1968. But even inside, the cast lines were drawn. Nimoy negotiated for fair pay and succeeded, angering Shatner, who felt undermined. Their rivalry became legend. Both men denied hatred, but admitted deep competition. It was a Cold War in space, mirrored by one on set. By season 3, everyone was exhausted and afraid. The mission was collapsing, and no one knew how to save it. Here lies the greatest irony. The show about infinite hope was dying from neglect. Even as its message of unity reached beyond television, NBC canceled it in 1969. Ratings were too low, budgets too high. The dream was over, but Star Trek refused to die. In syndication, reruns found a new audience. College students discovered it first, treating its moral debates as philosophy in disguise. Nimoy's Spock became a symbol of duality, human yet alien. Kirk, a metaphor for leadership under impossible pressure. The same actors who had been dismissed as science fiction relics suddenly became cultural icons. Shatner's exaggerated speech, once mocked, now became mythic. Nimoy's Vulcan salute turned into a universal sign of peace. The show that was too strange for its time became the blueprint for everything that followed, and the cast who once fought for survival became legends who shaped entire genres. It took a decade, but Star Trek's resurrection proved unstoppable. The first convention in 1972 drew thousands of fans packing hotel halls dressed as officers of the Enterprise. The cast who once hid their disappointment now found themselves worshipped. Paramount saw the opportunity and greenlit Star Trek: The Motion Picture in 1979. For the first time, the original crew reunited with full cinematic honor. For Shatner, it was vindication. For Nimoy, redemption. For Nichols and Takei, recognition long denied. They had gone from cancellation to box office triumph within 10 years, but beneath the smiles, old tensions lingered. Shatner and Nimoy's rivalry remained unresolved. Takei still remembered the pay disparity. Nichols still battled for respect. They had all survived the storm, but not unscarred. Yet something had changed. The audience had chosen them. The people had resurrected what the network buried. That was the true breakthrough. Everything that came after owes a debt to this fractured family. Star Wars learned its scale from Star Trek. Battlestar Galactica borrowed its moral backbone. Even modern franchises like The Expanse trace their DNA to that small soundstage in 1966. The cast themselves became advocates for causes beyond acting. Takei for LGBTQ rights, Nichols for NASA recruitment, Nimoy for mental health, Shatner for environmental awareness. They turned fictional heroism into real-life missions, and within every modern reboot lies a whisper of their original struggle. Each new generation inherits both the dream and the cost, the endless attempt to balance hope with realism, command with compassion. When you rewatch an episode, now remember the sweat, the silence, the compromise that built it. Each frame is the echo of human persistence, not special effects. Star Trek endures because it tells the truth dressed as fiction. It showed that progress is messy, that unity is a fight, not a gift, and its cast proved that ideals only matter when people suffer to uphold them. They were actors trapped in polyester and heat, yet their conviction made us believe in the 23rd century. They turned cardboard sets into cathedrals of imagination. They taught generations that exploration is not about space, but about self. When you watch them again, look past the painted stars, see the exhaustion behind the eyes, the grace under pressure, the humanity shining through prosthetics and politics. That is what most fans never figured out. The show's true miracle was not its technology, it was its empathy. Now the question is yours. What hidden truth did you miss aboard the Enterprise? Tell us below, and maybe watch it again with fresh eyes. Live long and prosper. After cancellation, many of the cast members faced an identity crisis. They had lived as these characters so vividly that the world refused to see them as anything else. Leonard Nimoy published a memoir titled I Am Not Spock in 1975, trying to reclaim himself. But years later, he wrote another I Am Spock, admitting that the separation was impossible. The character had fused with his soul. William Shatner, meanwhile, reinvented himself through relentless reinvention. He became an author, a recording artist, and eventually a self-parody. But beneath the bravado, there was loneliness. He once confessed in an interview that the bridge felt real because it was the only place he felt in control. Nichelle Nichols turned pain into progress. Joining forces with NASA, she helped recruit the first black and female astronauts, inspiring Mae Jemison, who later appeared on Star Trek: The Next Generation. George Takei transformed his experience of discrimination into activism, speaking out for equality and remembrance of Japanese-American internment. They all carried the shadow of Star Trek differently, some with pride, some with scars, but none could escape it. By the late 1980s, the tension between Shatner and Nimoy had become public. Their friendship fractured over creative control of the films. Nimoy directed Star Trek III and IV with precision, while Shatner directed V and faced critical failure. Yet time did what no negotiation could, it healed. In the final years, Nimoy and Shatner reunited in genuine affection. Nimoy stood as a guest at Shatner's events, calling him his brother. Their reconciliation mirrored the arc of Kirk and Spock, themselves conflict evolving into understanding. For the rest of the cast, that healing came more slowly. James Doohan battled illness and bitterness over old pay disputes, but found peace at conventions. DeForest. Kelly the gentle soul behind Bones. McCoy remained the quiet anchor until his passing in 1999. He was the heart of the crew without ever seeking the spotlight. The show's message of unity finally became real, not in fiction, but in forgiveness. Then came the second renaissance. The Next Generation launched in 1987, carrying the torch further than anyone imagined. The success of that sequel made audiences rediscover the original all over again. Suddenly, those old grainy episodes became sacred text. Universities analyzed them. Scholars wrote about their ethics and psychology. Kids memorized the dialogue as scripture. The cast went from fading actors to cultural prophets. Paramount's convention circuit became legend, a galaxy of fans orbiting around the people who once could not pay rent. The applause healed what the studio had broken. When Nichelle Nichols walked on stage, crowds chanted her name. When Takei raised the Vulcan salute, it felt like a political act. Shatner learned to embrace the myth instead of fighting it. The irony was beautiful. Star Trek had been dismissed as fantasy, yet it had created a community more loyal than any religion born from fiction, but grounded in human need. But behind the legacy were quiet costs. Nimoy suffered chronic pain from makeup chemicals and heat exposure. His hearing never fully recovered. Nichols endured racial prejudice long after the show ended. Takei lost years of work because Hollywood refused to cast Asian American men as heroes. Even Shatner carried emotional fallout. Decades later, he admitted that the fame was isolating, that every handshake reminded him of friendships lost under pressure. The series that united the world had once divided its family. In a 1994 convention panel, Nichols revealed that she was never paid residuals for early reruns. That small confession exposed the inequality baked into the industry. Contracts from the 60s had no protection for future syndication. So the actors who created cultural immortality were barely compensated for it. They lived long enough to see justice catch up, but it came slowly, painfully, almost too late. Yet, they kept showing up smiling for fans who had no idea of the personal price behind that legacy. At its core, Star Trek was never about space. It was about humanity confronting itself. The Enterprise was a stage where every moral question could be rehearsed without politics. Every crew member represented a fragment of us: logic, empathy, passion, doubt. That message extended into the cast's own lives: Shatner's persistence, Nimoy's introspection, Nichols' grace, Take's courage. Together they embodied the philosophy Roddenberry dreamed of, even when they did not always live it. What most fans never figured out is that the show was a prophecy. It predicted the cultural battles we are still fighting: representation, diversity, ethics of power. Even its failures became lessons. The struggle behind the scenes was not separate from the story. It was the story. That is why it continues to matter. Because it reminds us that progress is imperfect, and heroism can exist in ordinary exhaustion. When the reboot films arrived in the 21st century, the surviving cast watched with mixed emotions. They were proud yet haunted by absence. Nimoy became the bridge between eras, mentoring Zachary Quinto and blessing the new generation. His final cameo felt like a goodbye, not just to Spock, but to an entire philosophy. Shatner, meanwhile, remained the last captain standing still, active, still restless. He refused to slow down, traveling to conventions well into his 90s. He even went to space for real aboard Blue Origin in 2021, closing the circle that began on a Hollywood soundstage 60 years earlier. Takei continued to speak truth to power. Nichols retired with honors. And for millions of fans, their faces remained eternal, frozen in that bright 60s glow forever, young, forever exploring. They had become symbols of continuity between what we imagine and what we achieve. Every generation rediscovers Star Trek and thinks it belongs to them. But the truth is, it belongs to everyone who ever felt out of place. The half-human, half-Vulcan. The outsider at the console. The leader burdened by duty. The cast's revelations over the years turned nostalgia into wisdom. They reminded fans that the dream of the Federation was not about perfect people. It was about flawed souls choosing decency over despair. In a 2013 interview, Take said that Star Trek taught him the most powerful word in the English language: respect. That line sums up everything the series stood for and everything the cast eventually found in each other. Through laughter, tears, lawsuits, and loss, they reached the same destination. The stars were never the goal. The bridge between hearts was. Why does Star Trek still feel alive? Because it tells us that difference is strength. Because it teaches that leadership requires empathy. Because it whispers that tomorrow can still be better if we dare to imagine it. The cast lived those lessons even when the cameras stopped. They turned their private struggles into public courage. Their stories reveal the human truth behind the illusion of space adventure, that art can outlive suffering and belief can survive betrayal. So when you watch Kirk, Spock, Uhura, or Sulu again, know this. You are not just seeing actors playing roles. You are witnessing human beings proving that vision matters. That is what most fans never figured out. Star Trek. The original series was not perfect, but it was pure in its belief in possibility. The cast who carried it did more than act. They became guardians of an ideal that outlasted them all. So watch it again with fresh eyes. Look for the courage hidden between lines and the humanity burning behind the makeup. Then ask yourself this one question. If they could dream of such a future in 1966, what is stopping us now? Live long and truly prosper.